Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm real. So, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited for this episode. It's gonna be very intuitive. I have nothing planned besides the fact that we're just here and we'll see where it takes us. But I guess before we just jump into it, I want to hear a little bit about you. Like, what do you do? How you got to where you're at right now? Like, what was your process? Because obviously, for the people that don't know you, but because we're on this podcast and it's usually about self care or self love, self improvement, all those things. I'm like my question to you is how did you get into that journey of like healing and discovering yourself, spirituality, all those things? Like what tell us about it. Walk us through it.
Like a little bit of a backstory is that I was raised in a Christian environment, and so with my family, like they always had such great intentions, but they really wanted to protect me from a lot of things. But for me specifically, I was so curious, and so I felt very like in a box, and I felt like I couldn't explore the full realm of my identity. And so very quickly, I experienced a lot of anxiety and depression, and just having my true self restricted and feeling so anxious around anybody because of how they would perceive me and that I wouldn't be up to their expectations. And so I struggled with a lot of anxiety and depression until I was about 18. And then I decided to move from Vancouver to Australia. So, like, completely the other side of the
No,
world.
literally.
And then
How
I
was
went from
that?
being in it was wonderful, but it was just so chaotic because I went from being in a Christian environment to working in nightlife and being surrounded by like constant nightlife and of course everything that comes with that.
Mhm.
And I basically wasn't sober for about 3 years.
Wow.
So being in that mindset, but at the same time, knowing there was a spiritual aspect of me, but kind of resisting it because of the idea of what other people labeled as spiritual and being like, well, that doesn't align with me. So I like, if I wanted spirituality, I had to recreate it and rediscover it from scratch. And I didn't want to do that because I wanted to be able to be in that lifestyle I was in without shame.
Yeah.
And so I was exploring that for a long time, but in that, I was also very open to spirituality and kind of just observing the environments I was in and the different perceptions and mindsets I was in. And I remember, like, after every night out, I would spend the morning sitting outside with a coffee for like 3 or 4 hours, just sitting there and staring off into the sky or writing. But I was just soaking in and observing the experiences that I was having. But I
Mhm.
think unconsciously, there was so much discovery in that I couldn't implement because I was still in those limiting environments.
I
And
love
then there was one day where I was like, I just can't do this anymore. Like, I have no self control to stop drinking or smoking, and it's not what I want anymore. And so I moved back to Canada. And
it.
then within a month, I met my twin flame. We're still together. And that was just like when we met, I was like, I need him in my life. Like there's just so much about him that makes me feel more like me. But in order to keep him in my life, that means I need to start working on myself and be the person that I truly am. Otherwise, he's either not gonna fall in love with me or he's gonna fall in love with this wrong idea that eventually I'm gonna have to shape out of.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the beginning of like, okay, I need to start focusing on me. And then the next 2 years, I was just with him. Like I had no friends and I wasn't really focusing on that. So I was like at home, like resting basically from this, getting out of that fight or flight mode and just resting and being in an environment that was genuinely safe for once.
Mhm.
And he really held space for that and like space for me to let out all of my trauma and to navigate that and to release those emotions. So yeah, that was like the past 2 years. And then it was like a just about 6 months ago that we moved out of Toronto, and we've been traveling basically ever since.
You're in Mexico now, right?
Yeah, we're in Mexico now.
So cool.
But yeah, then so now I have my space on Instagram and I'm doing coaching. I'm doing a variety of digital products, and I also have a poetry book published from that season in Australia
Wow. What's it called?
called Don't Look for Your Own Head.
Okay. Interesting. I love that title.
Yeah, thank you.
So I want to backtrack a little because I'm curious. You were talking about your like Christian upbringing and how you felt like you needed to fit into like specific types of boxes and how you were always very curious and you wanted to explore certain things but you felt like you couldn't. What was that? Like what were those things that you felt like you wanted to explore if you can share a little bit?
I think that realistically, it was just my emotional expression.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes down to it, like I had a really beautiful upbringing in a lot of ways, and my family is so loving, but the love that they gave and the love that I needed just differed, and that was just not their fault in any way. And so um, my mom just wasn't really emotionally available,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's five of us in my family, five kids, and I'm the youngest. And so that
Oh.
turns into seven people who are emotionally unavailable. And so it just like, it made me really want to explore that. And then I think because, of course, because I wasn't given space to express my emotions, of course, there was this unspoken idea that I am not able to be accepted for who I am.
Mhm.
And for the fullness of who I am, I had to put on a smile and just be positive constantly. And that just naturally made me feel unsafe because I was like, I can't fake my personality. I've never been that one to be able to fake who I am. And so if I can't do that, I'm going to be punished. And so I might as well just be on my own. And I isolated a lot. And so I was just in my room and like I didn't go out a lot. So yeah, going back to your question, I think that it was mostly just the ability to express my fullness. And I translated that into wanting to explore all of the things that I couldn't explore because of being in a Christian background, like drugs and sex and alcohol and all of that. And so it was, okay, these are the things that are physically being taken from me. So maybe that's what I'm missing.
Oh yeah.
And so that's what I resorted to naturally. And
Yeah,
of
you were
course, it created this safe space for me to express my emotions. So it was like it worked hand in hand.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. I think a lot of people have this like idea that safety is all about this like safety in terms of your body. Like when you don't feel safe in your household, it's because maybe your parents are um abusive or something, but there's so many ways of not feeling safe in a household, and emotional mental safety is something that like most people don't talk about, but it is so important because I feel most people that's what they really deal with. Like most people have very emotionally unavailable parents because their parents never learned how to deal with their own emotions, and so they don't know how to hold space for their kids' emotions because kids don't have filters, and so it's like the kids get kind of punished or yelled at because the parents don't know how to like regulate it or how to navigate that depth. and I'm guessing it made you feel like you were too much for them.
For sure. That was like the main thing. I remember the first person I ever told this to was my boyfriend a couple of days after we met. And I was like, I was scared. And I expressed that to him. I was like, I'm scared that I'm going to be too much for you because I'm not in a place anymore where I can hold back who I am to make other people comfortable, but I also don't think that anybody can take the fullness of who I am. And so I'm just gonna like be alone, I guess. But then, of course, we're still together. But I really had that idea through my family and also through my friends, because there was also a lot of like, I lost multiple friends because I was too pretty. And that was just like so crazy to me, because I was like, this is just a part of me that I can't even control.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when I was young, it's not like I'm putting myself together and presenting myself super well all the time. It was just who I am. And I genuinely was like, I remember my friend telling me, like, you were the best friend like that I could possibly ask for, and you show up for me in every way, but I just can't, because like you just get too much attention and it makes me feel insecure. I forget the word she used, but that is what the,
Damn.
you know, the message was. And so losing my best friend my whole life due to that, I was like, okay, well, like me just existing is too much. And
Yeah.
then on that also stemmed from I was told very frequently that I would express my emotions to my friends, and they'd be like, oh, like you can't be sad or anxious because you're pretty
Oh my
and
God.
you have like a good family. And I'm like, yeah, I do, but there's so much more to that.
Yeah.
And I always had that. I was like, but that's not it. How can you not see that that's
Yeah.
not the whole story?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that alone was very isolating as well, and always made it seem like I was too much for other people.
I totally get that. It's like all you wanted was to be heard and feel seen, and they completely, I think they were just so maybe like blinded by their own insecurities and their own projections that they really weren't seeing that, you were hurt, that you needed them, that you just wanted to be loved and to be cared for,
Yeah.
because you were trying to do the same for them, and that's definitely hard to navigate. I definitely have felt like I was too much. I think I still kind of feel that way sometimes. It's like it's still here, a part of me, because I can be very expressive. And I remember when I was younger, people would say like, "Be quiet, like stop, you're making a scene," just because I was always like so excited about life. And suddenly it felt like I was weird and I was like the problem. I was just an embarrassment or something. And I think when you feel like you're too much, you end up kind of acting out, and you kind of become too much in a way. I remember I remember that I didn't know how to like make space for my friends. I always wanted to speak. I always wanted to say something. I always wanted to like share my story, but I had like such a hard time like giving them space, because I never felt like I had space my entire life, and so all I wanted was to just to be heard and seen, but I wasn't even doing it from a place of, just genuine appreciation for the friendship that we had or anything. It was just this lack of, I guess, self-validation maybe, and being like, all I want you is to hear me. That's like all I want. And so you end up becoming so much because of that, because you're just trying to make up for how you're feeling on the inside.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me personally, like I continued to keep everything to myself. And I
Mm-hmm.
really only had one close friend from about 15 until like 20. And yeah, I wouldn't express my emotions at all towards her. But
Mm-hmm.
then she would think that I was doing great all the time, and she would get angry at me for having it together all the time. But meanwhile, I was holding on to resentment towards her for not holding space for me, but really I wasn't holding space for me.
Yeah.
It's like it gets so lost in translation when we can't just say what is happening. But of course, it takes practice to actually get to that space of even being like, I'm gonna express what's going on, and if you can't hold space for that, I will. And
Yeah.
like, I don't need anybody else to hold what I can't hold.
Because I think first you need to learn how to be vulnerable with yourself.
For sure.
And I think that's something that most people, even me sometimes, like it's a struggle because it makes us feel so exposed to the things that we try to avoid the most, which is the pain, the hurt, the wounds, and we don't want to see that. So we're not even aware, but we're just trying to like compensate for all those things by by like acting tough, in your example, just being like, yeah, I'm okay, or not really sharing, just not wanting to hold space, or yeah, not really being available to have someone hold space for you, while deep down what you needed was to hold space for yourself in the first place. And I think for me it was kind of the same. It was like all I wanted was to be seen, but really I wasn't seeing myself. I wasn't really like checking in. I wasn't holding space for my own wounds, and I wanted someone to kind of save me. And that also happened a lot in my like romantic relationships. It was always like that. Like I just wanted someone to save me, someone to like take away the misery or something, and like the Prince Charming, and the truth is no one could ever do that because it was too much for them, because I needed to also take care of it. Like I also needed to just care for those parts of me that I was completely neglecting.
Yeah. And I think too, like one thing I've realized through my relationship is that like, a lot of people when they meet someone, they're like, oh, like perfect. They can fill this void in me. But I never had that thought when I met my partner. I had that thought when meeting other people. And then with meeting my partner, my immediate thought was that I need to work to make myself whole so that I can serve him. And it
Wow.
wasn't about me anymore. Like it was like I want to show up for him. I want to take care of him and I want to love him. So what can I do to offer myself enough love so that I can show up for him in that way? And that was something I always tell people, like if it's genuine love, it's not for you. Like I didn't go into the relationship because I wanted him to give me something. It was because I wanted to give him something.
Yeah.
And you know, being mindful of the balance, of course, that like he wasn't draining me,
Mm-hmm.
and being around him did energize me and allow space for me to be myself. And he gave me as much space and love and attention that I needed. But of course, it was a combination of us both offering.
Yeah.
But realizing that, yeah, I always say that like if you are looking for someone to fill the void in you, you will attract people who will act like the void in you.
That's literally it.
Right.
I hate that I relate to it so much, honestly, because I feel like all my life, all I've wanted, especially from romantic relationships, was for someone to choose me. Like that has been such a big thing for me. And what you're saying, like you wanted to become better for him, I think that's so beautiful, because what I hear when you say that is like it was in service to love, with capital L. And I think in my past relationships, it was always like I wanted to be better, but it was so he could like validate me, or he could love me, or he could choose me. And it was not coming from a place of, I choose myself, but I want to create something with this person. I want to nurture this. And I think that definitely changes who you attract and what you create in those like relationships. It's a
Yeah,
completely different energy and mindset.
yeah, for sure. I think because we met a month after I moved back from Australia, and we had known each other before that, so we were
Okay.
briefly in contact, and so I was aware of his presence. And there was a part of me that just kind of knew there was something there,
Mm-hmm.
but of course I ignored it because I was like, it's just crazy. But so I just didn't think much of it. But at the same time, I remember writing in my journal a couple days before we met that like it was the first time in my life where I didn't feel like I needed a relationship, but I was open to one.
Mm.
But I wrote that I refused to make myself small And I don't think it's possible that right now I would find someone who's also in their 20s who could hold space for the fullness of who I am.
Oh,
But I refuse to shift who I am for anybody else. And right when I like made that claim where I was like, I will not make myself small for anybody, we met. And that's the way that I showed up for him as well. Like I was so just blunt and like forward, and I didn't, like we went on a road trip like 3 days after we met, and just like not having the need to wear makeup or to like, I didn't try to impress him. I
mm,
just wanted to show up and like, this is me in every aspect.
yeah,
And I think I had that ability to show up in that way because there wasn't a part of me like that was, I need to make him like me.
mm,
And I need that validation. It was like, if he does, he does. And if he doesn't, I do. So,
exactly.
like if he doesn't like me, that's okay. And of
Yeah.
course, that was when I was able to show up like that. He got to see who I am fully, and he loves that person. If I made myself small to try and fit into what I thought he would need,
Hmm.
then maybe he would have had a false idea of who I
Yeah.
am,
Hmm.
not, seen my truth and loved that. So
Yeah.
it was it was quite interesting to see that happen though, especially reading back in my journal and being like, wow, like
That's why I
that
love
played
journaling.
out. Yeah.
It's just love reading those back. I think, it's really brave to like do that for someone that has always felt like too much, finally being like, okay, if I'm too much, then like fuck it, Like I'm just
Yeah.
gonna be my too muchness, and I'm okay with that finally. I think that self-acceptance is such a big part of finding inner peace, I'd say. Because as long as you're like chasing that feeling, it's like you're always chasing. Like it doesn't stop until you finally sit with yourself and start being like, okay, let me like see myself and let me understand myself. Let me embrace myself. I think that's
I,
definitely something like that people need in order to not put so much, I guess, pressure in their relationships to feel something that it just can't do.
yeah, I think that like the key to being happy is to just like who we are.
Hmm.
And like you'll be okay if this thing slips through or like you didn't get that job or whatever, if you genuinely love who you are, because it's not questioning your self-worth and your value and your ability to show up on this planet. When you're placing your value in everything outside of yourself, then your value is going to drop to 0 and 100 like that.
Hmm.
And it's never going to be consistent. And I think being happy is just rooting yourself into your value being in who you are, in your personality, and aligning yourself to your values and just keeping it at that.
Yeah. How would you say you find that place? Like, what is the process? How how is your process into finding that kind of self-acceptance? Because I know you talk a lot about self-discovery, and I'm guessing, or I guess I can ask you, like, does self-discovery go into self-acceptance? Can you accept yourself without fully discovering yourself? Like, give me the juice.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's 100% self-acceptance. And I think that we have this idea that everybody has parts of themselves that they like and they don't like. And we
Mhm.
have this idea that if we shove down the parts we don't like, they'll just disappear. But realistically, the more that they're shoved down, the more control they have over us, and they start becoming who we are. And
Mhm.
it's the opposite of what we want, but we're too scared to actually face it and to embrace it. And so we become the shadow rather than shining light onto the shadows.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's been like, when it came down to it, so when I was in Australia and still in the party season of my life, I genuinely loved who I was as a person. I did. I just didn't have the ability to show that and to show up fully with that because I was still quite insecure, and the ability for other people to love me and to value me for
Mhm.
something further than superficial reasons. So I think it was the idea that I genuinely liked who I was, but it was the fear that other people wouldn't. And that's what stopped me from genuinely being able to embrace the fullness of me. And so I guess it really started when, yeah, I genuinely loved who I was, but I wouldn't let that person fully out. And then there was a point where I was like, okay, I'm over it. Like, I don't care if other people like me for someone I'm not. I'd rather at least be who I am and be on my own.
Mm.
Um, hmm. I think it was just a moment for me personally, like it was when I was journaling, and I was just like, I'm not gonna hold myself back to try and fit into the ideals of someone else because just because other people are small, that doesn't mean I need to make myself small to make them comfortable.
Yeah.
And so if I allow myself to shine brightly, it will trigger people, but that's a good thing.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
maybe they'll embrace it in judgment and anger towards you for being who you are, but really you're just saying, hey, there's these pieces in you that you're not letting see the light, and they want to, and you
Yeah.
want to be embraced, you want to express who you are, and you can't. And so maybe it'll be projected onto you as anger, but really you're offering them something so great.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll see it and maybe they won't, but that's not up to you.
Yeah.
And I think, the journey of becoming that and embracing that fully is a lot of self acceptance and accepting what is rather than what we want things to be.
Mm.
And it's a slow journey as well. Like, there you have to just let things come up as they come up, and every time you have a heavy emotion, be like, great, another opportunity to let something go so that I can become more like myself. It's not something that's challenging us, it's something, well, I mean, it is, but when challenging things arise, we think that it's something that's saying that we're not worthy, that we're
Yeah.
not good enough.
Like a
And
punishment.
yeah, but really it's like, hey, here's this little, like, gift that you're being offered. And if you dig through it and if you look at it, you'll be able to step further into your abundance and into your truth.
Hmm.
And so I think it's just, setting back that fear. And that's something that we can do on our own as well. Like, we don't need to randomly have this courage to, like, go out and be super expressive to everyone else, but this is so much of an inner journey. And
Yeah.
so just when we have challenging emotions, rather than seeing it as something that's harming us, seeing it as something that's helping us grow and really be curious about it. Like when I was triggered so much at the beginning of my relationship because I was in a safe environment for those triggers to come up. And of course, when you really love someone, you get triggered a lot easier.
Yeah.
And so every time it came up, I was just like, whoa, what's this? Like, what's happening? It wasn't me randomly being angry at my partner because he did this. It was like, why did that cause this reaction? Like,
Mhm.
what's happening? And it's just curiosity, but then at the same time, feeling it out. And so I think it's a lot of accepting ourselves unconditionally for the fullness of who we are and understanding that by embracing our shadows, we're not becoming them. By like pushing them down, we're becoming
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And the more that you can face them and see what they're offering you, the more ability you will have to actually be yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. I think people might not understand the concept of, how can you become your shadows when you're not really, I guess, like observing them or addressing them. And I think it's the best way to explain is that it's kind of like something that keeps poisoning you until you don't have that life anymore, if that makes sense. Because there's this light within you, it's like life force, let's say. And those shadows, when they're not, I guess, being loved, which is, or accepted, which is the process of just, yeah, just really bringing those shadows into the light. I think what happens is we become them because what we're not aware of takes control. Because if we're not aware of it,
You
then
can't control it.
yeah, you can't control it. It's just out of
Yeah.
our control. And I think it definitely takes a while to like find that acceptance. I feel like it took me a few years to feel like I'm finally learning to accept myself, and there's still things that I'm working on because it's like there's always more depth to those shadows and to those wounds. And as you discover more of that, you also have to learn how to have a deeper sense of like self acceptance. That's what I feel like, because maybe I've accepted like certain things, but those like deeper shadows that I'm still not fully addressing, those are things
Yeah.
that you kind of do as you go. And that's why it's so important to have that curiosity that you were talking about, because with that curiosity of like, why am I being triggered? Why does this feel this way? It allows you to come from a place of non-judgment.
Mhm.
It gives you some openness to work with yourself, to understand yourself. Because if you're judging yourself up front, it's going to be much harder to do that work. I remember that I used to be so judgmental towards just feeling certain things, like, "Oh, why am I so triggered?" Like, but from a place of just frustration and anger at myself, because I felt like I had to be better, or I had to do better. And I think that's also, there's also that concept in spirituality that, like, it's all love and light and it's all positive stuff. But the truth is, like, if we don't embrace that depth, that messiness that we have as humans, then like automatically I feel like we're just not going to feel whole, because there's always a part of us that we
Because
are
we're not
not.
embracing our wholeness. Like we're
Yeah,
not just positive, high energy beings all the
yeah.
time. Yeah.
And that wholeness, I think, is what makes us feel alive and grateful to be who we are. And ultimately that's what connects us to love, is when we realize like I'm a whole human being and I'm perfect as I am, which doesn't mean that I can't improve, but it means that like where I am right now and who I am is is okay, like it's enough. And I think that's definitely such a big process. um do you think that a little bit of solitude helps with that process, especially in the beginning?
Solitude,
Hmm.
100%. Unless you have people who can genuinely hold space for you and allow you to shift, even if that means shifting away from them, which is really rare to have. Unless you have that, then being on your own is way better because there's so much that you're gonna explore, and you may be like, okay, well, let's try this out, and then you do it for a few weeks and it doesn't work out, and then you want to try something new, and that's just kind of, that's discovery. You're exploring and you're seeing what works for you and what doesn't. And sometimes we'll have people in our lives who will judge us for doing that or make us feel bad for doing that. And so, yeah, I think solitude is a really, really important thing, especially finding um, that love and acceptance for ourselves outside of other people's love and acceptance.
Yeah,
And not being like, okay, I'm gonna be like a yogi now, and then placing your whole identity on that
yeah,
rather than, if that wasn't there, would you still value yourself as a person? Because it's just something you're now, instead of identifying with being worthless, you're identifying with being this, and it's just the whole point is to just exist.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think having solitude really gives you permission to firstly explore your emotions without being worried about people perceiving you.
Yeah.
Um, I think that solitude is like a cocoon for sure.
Yeah. It's
It's
so
just
important.
you have all this time to process and explore, and then when you come out of it, you're like, okay, these are the kinds of people I want to attract.
Mhm.
And if you there's a lot of shame around leaving other people behind when you've grown and they haven't. I think, for me personally, if none of the people who I was friends with before, I could be friends with now.
Yeah.
And some people are still acquaintances and slightly in my life, but they're not a huge part of my life
Yeah.
anymore. And if you if you limit yourself to keeping those relationships, you also limit yourself to what those relationships require of you.
That's so
And
true.
so I think a lot of solitude is definitely like everybody I know who's gone into like the spiritual journey and the journey of healing starts with a lot of solitude.
Yeah, it's just so important. I think that's actually when my journey started, is when I was spending more time on my own because I had just finished high school. I took a gap year, so I spent a lot of time just on my own. And the truth is, we don't do that a lot. Like as humans, we're like in school for 8 hours a day or something, always surrounded by noise and classes and stuff. Then we're at home with our parents, then we have TVs and phones and videos and all of that. And there's always so much external noise, I think, that we never really understand that there is so much going on within us that is actually the root of the reality that we're living in. And I remember that when I finally stopped, that's when I started seeing what was behind so much of, like, so many of my fears and my limiting beliefs, and just the way I perceived reality in general. And I also, I guess, well, I wouldn't say that I lost friendships because I don't even know if there were friendships, like proper friendships to start with. They were so toxic, I swear. Um, like to the point I've told this story a few times, but to the point where I remember sometimes I used to party like every week. That was like my high school year, basically the last year. And I remember that my friends, when I was like being crazy, because I'm already loud. So if I'm a little tipsy or drunk, I swear I'm definitely a lot. But my friends at the time, they would just like snap out at me and they would slap me, just like literally be like, behave, even if I wasn't doing anything like that bad or
Mhm.
that serious. But they were just like completely disrespectful of me. And that was normal to them, and that's okay. But I just started realizing that like my level of awareness was becoming like higher and higher, or bigger and bigger, and being with them made me feel guilty for the process that I was going through for my expansion. It was the same with my past relationship. I knew I was outgrowing it because I was starting to feel the need to shrink in order to keep that person in my life.
Yeah.
And when that's happening, like it's not going to be good for you. You're just going to suffer at that point.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think like if loving someone else makes you love yourself less, then it's just like get out of that.
Yeah.
And I think too, there's a hard in between. I mean, there's no black and white. There's always this like technicolor world of possibilities. But
Yeah.
when it comes down to relationships, of like, you want people to be able to call you out when you're not aligning yourself with your own values, but you also don't want to be around people who shrink you to their own insecurities. And
Yeah.
people can get confused on the in between because people can come up to you and tell you that you're doing this and this and maybe you should act differently. when really they're just trying to help you and they're trying to help you see your own inner world. But then
Yeah,
there's other people who are reflecting their own trauma onto you. And it's a
it's
hard
definitely,
balance of finding,
it is. It's
yeah,
also work that I think the two people have to put, because at least from the like conscious relationships that I have, especially with my best friend, we have triggered each other so much because we are kind of on this journey together, and we've had to do so much inner work in order to like grow inside the relationship, but also as people, because it's the first time that we're actually committed to a relationship, like from a place of we don't need each other necessarily, but we want this and we
yeah,
want to commit to it. And it takes a lot because we are able to call each other out, but also from a place of love. And there's like so much nuance in there. It's
mhm.
definitely complicated, but I think
Yeah.
it's a
It's
beautiful
one of the
journey to go.
hardest things to like have someone you love and be like, you're doing all these things wrong. And it's
Sucks.
like, I'm telling you this because you're not like, it's not that. It's making sure that you're calling people out because you're aligning them to their values and not to your needs.
Hmm.
But when you're doing that still, it can come across in a way that's like, this is for me. But it's definitely one of those things that's the hardest thing to show up for your friends, really, and like call them out when they're not aligning with behavior that they genuinely want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think it's also good because I think we grow so much more together, and it's good to also have someone that can check in for you and be like, okay, some
Yeah.
things here, they're not good. You need to like stop, or you need to just check in with yourself because something's not right. I think it's so important to have that in your life.
Yeah, no, I get that for sure.
So, about self-discovery, I want to go there a little because I know that's something that you talk a lot on your page. For someone in their 20s that is just starting their journey, how I'm betting so many people ask themselves like, how do I find myself? Like, what does that even look like?
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if you can answer that question.
How to find yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's firstly just asking yourself, like, I always say the best way to do it is just if there was like the coolest, most inspiring person in the world, what would they look like? What would their life look like? What would their hobbies and their fashion sense look like? Because that's supposed to be you.
Okay.
Because you should wake up and be so inspired and absolutely love the person that you are. And so having that idea of who is that person,
Mm-hmm.
and also not having, when we ask it in that way, like if there was this magical person who's someone else, who would it be? And
Mm-hmm.
then it's not, not allowing ourselves to put our limiting perspective onto it of the circumstances and limiting beliefs that we have. And so I think that's always a great question to ask. I've asked myself that a lot, and it's always the same answer. And so I'm like, well, there we go. And I can slowly, shape myself into that person. It doesn't have to be overnight, but it's like, okay, they do this one thing, I can do that one thing. Maybe I'll do it once a week, but, slowly shifting myself into that behavior.
Yeah.
Um, and I think also just radical acceptance has to be the most important thing, and fully accepting every bit of your story, and rather than holding resentment to what has happened to
Yeah.
us and the things that we've done, is see why we did those things and why they happened to us, because everything is so intentional. For I could hold resentment that I didn't have space to express who I was in my upbringing, but I'm so happy that that was the case, because now I am someone who's also helping people express their fullness of
Yeah.
who they are. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't have that if that wasn't withheld from me at one point in my life, because I wouldn't see it as a privilege.
I love
And,
it.
that comes with literally everything. Like I had negative sexual experiences not because of who I am or my worth. It was because now that I'm aware of this and I'm aware of the way that people show up in the world with that, um, now I can see what it's not. And everything teaches you something.
Yeah.
And we grow more from challenging experiences than we do from good ones. And
Yeah.
so instead of it just seeing and accepting our entire story
I love that.
and asking ourselves instead of like, why did this happen to me? Is like, what was this offering me? And
Hmm.
really going back to every little bit of our story and being like, what did that teach me? What did that show me that can now be a tool to become the person I want to become rather than a barrier to who we want to become? Because, yeah, everything in our story happens so intentionally. And when we can see that and give ourselves permission to accept it, then I think that's one of the biggest catalysts for really just shifting yourself into someone that you love.
I love that.
Yeah.
There's this quote that I just remember that it goes like, if you want to love yourself, you cannot hate the experiences that shaped you. And I feel like that's so real because my upbringing was definitely challenging and I used to feel so much resentment for it. Like my entire life until like a few years ago, I had so much anger within me because I felt like how I was treated, how I was handled, it was so unfair. And I was always like, you did this wrong, like pointing fingers at my parents, like you screwed me up, like you broke me, you made me this way. And it's not that it's necessarily false, but it's that it just at the end of the day it doesn't even matter because as you are right now, a grown-up adult, they can't do anything for you. Like the mistakes that they made, because I do believe that, it doesn't mean that you don't get to recognize that some people were just bad people or that they had wrong attitudes with you, that they hurt you or that they did things that aren't good. It's not that you don't recognize that, but it's that you have to just be like, it gets to be okay. There's nothing I could have done differently. I cannot go back. I cannot change that. And so why would I let it change me and the person that I can become?
Yeah.
Because like especially in my experience, I've always struggled with like having an open heart, and that's something that I'm working towards more and more because I feel like it's so important, not just for the love that I get to attract, the friendships, but also for the love that I feel within myself, the love that I give myself. And and that openness started when I started to forgive for the past, not just, again, not because what they did was okay, but because it's done, and because ultimately, just like you said, deep down, it's so weird. I never thought I would ever feel this way, but like from a few months till now, I actually feel grateful for everything that happened. And I honestly never thought I would feel that way because I always had so much resentment. And that was kind of like my identity at that point. Like I blame the world, I blame you guys, like fuck you, I hate you, you treated me like crap, and this is why I am this way. And now I'm just like, damn, I'm actually happy because like it brought me here. Like what a great story, what a great plot twist that like someone, I always felt like I was broken, especially during my teenage years, that was like I'm so broken beyond repair. And and finally understanding that like that I'm not, and that it started with understanding that that past doesn't have to define me, and it gets to heal me in a way, like it's an
Mm.
opportunity to do that. And I think that's definitely a big life changer because I think what people are afraid of is going there. It's going to the like those main wounds, let's say, the like the root of those things, the abandonment issues, the like where the self-hatred started, or where the feeling of we are too much or we're not lovable or all those things started. And I really think that when we start going there and making peace with it, that that is just it's what it is, it sets us free, I think.
Oh, for sure. I think like a couple of things I would love to add to that is like, firstly, is we can't change our experiences, but we can change how they shape us. Like, I remember hearing a story, and it's just like there was these two brothers, and the dad was abusive to them, and one guy ended up being like an amazing dad to his kids because he wanted to make sure they didn't experience that and they felt safe. And then
Mhm.
the other brother was abusing his kids. And so it's not the experience, it's the way that we choose for it to affect us and to shape us. And another thing is that a huge tool in self-discovery is compassion, of course,
Yeah.
towards ourselves, but also seeing that, like, our parents or whoever it is that hurt us, but I'll say, our parents didn't treat us this way because they wanted to.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
the best. They did their best.
They didn't know
And
better.
unfortunately, they didn't have any tool to do a great job, but they still did the best they could.
Yeah.
And, they didn't, I always say, like, it's most likely more than anything that their childhood was a lot worse than yours.
Yeah, literally.
So they're doing what they can to make it better, and that doesn't mean it's perfect, but they did what they could, and having that compassion for them. It's not like they were living a great life and they projected this shitty one onto you. Like, they were struggling, and they
Yeah.
were probably struggling more than you were,
Yeah.
and they tried to hide that and they tried to show you love, but you can only do so much.
Yeah, you can.
And so having that perspective of compassion towards your past and towards your current self for how you're able to handle it like is life changing.
It is. It definitely is. I think trying to understand it from the perspective that we have nowadays, because as kids, we don't understand all these things. We don't understand that our parents are going through stuff, but being able to go back to those stories and see what was happening that led to that, understand their past and why, why they were the way that they were, it definitely makes you understand that it wasn't about you. Because I think that's what we kind of absorb as kids. It's like, I'm unworthy, I'm
Mm-hmm.
the problem, and it's not at all. Like it was never about us. And I definitely feel like that gives us a sense of just peace and acceptance. And the
Mm-hmm.
story of the two brothers, I love that. And it kind of gives you the perfect example of what it looks like when you don't address your shadows and you don't learn to accept them. It's like you become the shadows. You without realizing, because I'm sure that person, that one brother, he didn't want to be abusive to his kids, but he just followed the pattern because that's what he knew. And because he never addressed those wounds, then he perpetuated the pain onto
Mm-hmm.
his kids, onto his life. And that's
Yeah.
what happens when we don't learn to go there and to make best friends out of those demons, let's say, and
Yeah.
understand that they're our greatest allies to the life that we want to create. I think
Yeah,
that's
most
definitely
definitely.
important.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, you know, it comes back to just every challenge is offering us something. If you want to pick it up or not, that's up to you.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it's always an opportunity to get closer and closer to your essence
Hmm.
and that divine love, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think so too.
That's a beautiful way to wrap it up. It just feels like we went full circle, or I don't know. It just felt good, like a conclusion.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
Wow,
so.
that was a lot in the best way. I just feel very excited. I feel like after this, I'm gonna have to like go for a jog or something.
and
just
move it all out.
just it's always good to talk about these things.
Mhm.
I I want to make sure that like people that are either struggling or still in the process of like getting past that survival mode, that they can have these types of conversations to inspire them and guide them towards something different, which ultimately it's like wholeness, inner peace, and all those things. So thank you so much for like this conversation and for the wisdom that you shared with us. That
Of
was so
course.
great. And yeah, I think that was it.
Thank
I'm
you for
gonna
having me.